My name is Doris, and I've always believed that growing old didn't mean growing helpless. I drive myself to the grocery store, mow my own lawn, and still bake my grandson's favorite lemon cake from scratch. I've lived in the same house for over 40 years, and I don't like being told what I can or can't handle. That's why what Ethan whispered to me that afternoon knocked the breath out of my lungs. We were at his 9th birthday party, surrounded by balloons, cupcakes, and the loud squeals of other children. He leaned in close, his little hand gripping mine tighter than usual. "Grandma, Mom wants to put you in a nursing home tonight. Then she's going to sell your house." I didn't even react at first. I just looked at him, confused, waiting for him to laugh or say he was kidding. But his face stayed serious, and then he looked away like he already regretted telling me. I sat there, staring at the pastel frosting on the cake as people sang, "Happy birthday." I didn't sing. I didn't move. My heart was thudding so loud I thought someone might notice. Kayla, my daughter, was lighting candles like nothing was wrong. She smiled too widely, laughed too loudly. I've always had good instincts. When my husband died, everyone thought I'd fall apart. But I didn't. I took care of the house, the paperwork, the silence. I raised Kayla mostly on my own and gave her more than I ever had. But lately, she'd been calling less, showing up more with questions I didn't like. How was I doing? Had I thought about downsizing? Did I want help with managing things? Now I was looking at her through a different lens. Every word, every visit, every so-called check-in started to feel rehearsed, strategic, like she'd been laying a foundation for something I wasn't supposed to notice. I didn't touch my cake. I just kept hearing Ethan's voice in my head. Nursing home. Tonight. I excused myself to the bathroom, but I didn't need to go. I locked the door behind me and leaned against the sink. My reflection didn't look like someone who needed help. I was tired, yes, and my hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't done. If they thought they could do this behind my back, they didn't know me at all. I ran the water to cover the sound of my breathing. Cold and shallow, my fingers shook a little. But not from fear. It was rage. Quiet, coiled rage. I couldn't say anything yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. I left the bathroom and smiled when I passed Kayla in the hallway. She handed me a paper plate with cake I hadn't asked for. I thanked her, like I always did. Polite. Calm. "Play the game, Doris." The party went on around me, but I wasn't really there anymore. I was already in my head, flipping through every interaction, every request, every conversation I'd brushed off as concern. I saw it now for what it was. Preparation. Positioning. That night, they thought they were going to take everything I had. My home, my life, my decisions. But they were about to learn something they'd forgotten. I'm not just a grandmother. I'm a woman who's survived more than they'll ever know. And I don't go down quietly. Kayla called it a casual dinner, just the family, nothing fancy. She said Tom was grilling steaks, and Ethan wanted me to bring my lemon pie. I baked too, even though my stomach had been tight all day. When I pulled into their driveway, everything looked too perfect. The lawn was freshly cut, the porch swept clean, and even the welcome mat looked like it had been shaken out just minutes before. I stepped out of the car, and the smell of lavender candles hit me before I even reached the front door. Kayla answered, with that same high-pitched cheerfulness she used on her clients. Her arms wrapped around me too fast, her hands lingering too long on my back. She said I looked wonderful, that Ethan was so excited, and how lucky they were to have me. Tom waved from the grill, tongs in hand, a beer bottle sweating on the patio table beside him. He smiled like he'd been practicing in the mirror. I smiled back, but something in me stayed stiff. I handed Kayla the pies, and she gasped like I'd brought gold bars instead of dessert. Inside, the table was already set. Napkins folded, wine poured. Kayla never poured wine before dinner. She never remembered which one I liked, but tonight, it was my favorite, waiting at my seat like a prop. I sat down slowly, taking it all in. The house was quieter than usual. No television in the background. No, Ethan is ounding through the hallway. Just soft jazz playing on the speakers, the kind you hear in waiting rooms, trying too hard to be calming. Tom came in with the steaks, medium rare, just like I liked them. Another surprise. I hadn't told him that in years. Kayla brought out the sides, each dish placed perfectly, like something out of a magazine. She made a joke about finally learning to cook after all these years, and they both laughed a little too loudly. We ate, but I barely tasted anything. I kept watching them, their eyes darting to each other, their smiles never reaching the corners. Tom kept asking me if I was comfortable, if I needed a cushion, and if the steak was too salty. Kayla complimented my earrings twice. I'd worn them every Thanksgiving for the past decade. Ethan stayed quiet for most of the meal. He sat across from me, picking at his mashed potatoes, barely meeting my eyes. I asked him how school was going, and he shrugged. Kayla jumped in to answer for him, saying he'd made the honor roll. Wasn't that wonderful? She patted his head like a doll. Every time I started to say something, they redirected. Tom would ask about my garden, then cut me off to tell a story about the neighbor's cat. Kayla kept saying how grateful they were, how I was such a blessing. It wasn't flattery, it was groundwork. When dinner ended, Kayla stood up and announced they had something important to talk about. She said it like she was pitching a product. Tom nodded, pulled a folder from the sideboard. My heart slowed. Not sped up. Slowed. I sipped my wine and looked at the folder without touching it. Kayla said they'd been talking about my future. How hard I worked. Maybe it was time to let them help. The way she said help made me want to scream. Tom placed his hand on mine. His palm was cold. He said they had options. Just options. Nothing scary. Assisted living, maybe. Something with good care, activities, and people my age. He said it like it was a gift, like I should be thankful. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at his plate, frozen. Then I looked back at Kayla. Her eyes too wide. Her smile too still. The candles flickered. The house smelled like lavender and lies. They thought I wouldn't see it. The manipulation, the staging, the rehearsed kindness. But I saw everything. I always have. I just never wanted to believe it came from my own daughter. I pushed the folder back gently and smiled. I told them I appreciated the concern. That I'd think about it. Kayla exhaled, relieved. Tom squeezed my hand again. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. They thought I was weak, that I was old and alone, and ready to be handed off like an old sweater. But they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. They'd underestimated me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not out of habit, but from a buzzing in my chest I couldn't shake. I sat in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee, thinking through every detail of that dinner. The folder, the wording, the overly perfect meal. None of it sat right. So I started looking. I didn't storm through the house like a woman on a mission. I moved slowly. Opened drawers I hadn't opened in weeks. I checked the front hall table, where Kayla sometimes left things when she visited. And there it was, a printout of an email from a senior care agency, folded in half but not sealed. The subject line read, "Available beds for immediate transfer." My fingers stayed still on the paper. My heart didn't race. It just hardened a little more. Next to it was a handwritten note. My name, followed by a list of facilities, each with a phone number. One of them was underlined. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, staring out the window, letting it all click into place. This wasn't some vague idea they were floating. This had been in motion. The dinner wasn't the start. It was the final step. Later that afternoon, I let the answering machine play through its saved messages while I peeled potatoes. The third one was from a woman named Judy, confirming a call from Kayla about scheduling a home health evaluation. My house, my life. And not a word of it had come through me. That night, I passed by the guest room where Kayla sometimes stayed when she claimed she didn't want to drive back late. The door was cracked. I heard her voice inside. Soft, but clipped. She was on the phone, and the only part I caught before she lowered it was clear enough. As long as she signs before the end of the month, the rest is simple. I didn't stop. I didn't confront. I walked past like I hadn't heard. But inside, everything shifted. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't scared. I was planning. I went back to my room, opened the locked drawer where I kept my old records, and pulled out my copy of the deed, my will, my power of attorney. My fingers brushed the edge of each page like they were weapons I'd forgotten I owned. They thought I was confused. But I wasn't. I was preparing. Not to argue. Not to plead. Just to win. Quietly. Properly. Completely. The next morning, I was out the door by 8. I wore a cardigan with worn cuffs, soft enough to look tired but clean enough to be taken seriously. I drove straight to my lawyer's office without telling a soul. Susan, the receptionist, greeted me like an old friend, and I told her I needed to update everything. It was urgent, but I didn't sound panicked. I sounded ready. By 10, I had a new draft of my will in motion. I reviewed it line by line, cutting and reshaping where I needed to. Kayla and Tom's names came off. Ethan's name went in, firm and final. I asked about adding a clause to protect it from being contested. My lawyer raised her eyebrows, but she didn't ask questions. She just made the notes. Next, I called Alan at the bank. I told him I needed to review all my accounts. No details. Just a quiet request from a woman who suddenly realized silence was no longer safe. He said he'd meet me tomorrow morning. I thanked him, like we were planning tea, not a legal audit of my life. That afternoon, I called Marie, my neighbor for the past 30 years. The one who saw Kayla come and go, but never asked questions. I told her I needed her to sit in on something personal. Not a witness, just a presence. She said yes before I finished the sentence. I spent the evening at my kitchen table, laying out papers like puzzle pieces, bank records, insurance documents. The power of attorney Kayla didn't know I'd already revoked 2 years ago. I made 2 copies of everything and sealed them in an envelope. Then I tucked it behind the flour jar in the pantry. If anything went wrong, Marie knew where to find it. Later, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced. I let my shoulders sag. I let my voice go soft, unsure. I squinted a little, like I couldn't quite read the print. Then I reset and did it again. It had to be just enough, just believable enough for them to try and trap me. The next day, I set the table with 3 chairs, one for me, one for Kayla, one for Tom. Marie would sit just out of view, quiet but close. My lawyer would arrive 15 minutes in, just in time to watch the show. They thought this was their plan, but this dinner would be mine. I answered the door slowly, just like I practiced. One hand on the frame, the other gripping the side table for support I didn't need. Kayla stood there in a navy blazer, too polished for dinner. Tom smiled like he was about to sell me something, his shirt tucked too tightly into his slacks. They stepped in with that manufactured warmth, praising the smell of chicken casserole and asking how I'd been. I tilted my head, squinted a little, like I had to think about the question. I told them I'd been tired lately, a little forgetful, then chuckled softly like it didn't matter. They ate that up like dessert. The table was already set. I offered them tea I didn't make myself, and sat down slowly, patting my lap like I wasn't sure where to rest my hands. Tom commented on the roses outside, saying they looked better than ever. I nodded and thanked him, even though I knew he hadn't looked at those bushes once in 3 years. Kayla launched into updates about Ethan's school, her new job responsibilities, and how busy things had been lately. Her words came out fast, like she needed to get through a list. I smiled and nodded, just enough to look engaged. Every time Tom reached for his cup, he glanced at Kayla. When she shifted in her chair, she'd glance at her purse on the floor. The folder was in there. I didn't have to ask. They were waiting for the right moment, building comfort like a magician misdirecting the audience. I kept sipping my tea, letting it go lukewarm. I noticed how Kayla's voice rose when she talked about how much they worried about me living alone. She placed her hand on mine, soft and rehearsed. I asked her what we were celebrating tonight. She smiled too fast and said, "Family, just family." Tom chuckled and added that they just wanted to check in, see how I was doing. I told them I was fine and let my hand shake slightly when I reached for my glass. Kayla leaned in then, lowering her voice just a little. She said they'd been doing some research. Just out of love, of course. A few things to talk through, some ways they could support me better. Nothing urgent, she said. Nothing scary. I looked at her and blinked, slow like I needed to catch up. Then I nodded, asked if I could see a photo of Ethan from last week's field trip. She pulled out her phone, relieved for the detour, and showed me the picture. I smiled. Not for the photo, for how well this was going. The moment stretched thin, the air in the room felt padded, staged, like everything had been wiped down and rearranged just enough to look natural. But I could see it all, the too perfect kindness, the careful pacing, the eagerness tucked behind their eyes. They were almost ready. I could tell by the way Kayla's hand reached toward her purse. Almost time. I smiled again and waited. Kayla reached into her purse and pulled out the folder like it was nothing. She laid it on the table with a smile that almost looked relieved. Tom shifted forward in his seat, fingers laced, voice soft as he said, "They just needed a few signatures. Nothing complicated. Just some paperwork. To make sure I was protected." I looked at the folder and let my hand tremble slightly. I asked what it was again. Kayla leaned in, gentle as ever, and said it was a power of attorney. It would help them manage my bills, medical decisions, and things that could get confusing with age. Just in case, she added, like it was no big deal. I nodded and asked if I could have someone explain it to me. Kayla blinked. Tom looked confused. I stood slowly, walked to the kitchen doorway, and opened it. My attorney, Rachel, stepped into the room, briefcase in hand. Marie followed her, holding a small notepad. No one said a word. Kayla's face drained of color. Tom sat back fast, eyes flicking to the papers like they might catch fire. I smiled at both of them, then sat down, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I said if I was going to sign something that changed my life, I wanted to do it properly, with people I trusted watching. Rachel opened the folder. She flipped through the pages, slow and careful. Then she looked up and said plainly that this wasn't a simple power of attorney. It gave full control of my finances, my property, and my medical rights. Kayla's mouth opened, but I didn't let her speak. I asked her if this was what she meant by helping. She didn't answer. I turned to Tom and asked if he thought I was too old to notice what was happening. He looked down at his hands. I said I might not be young, but I was not foolish. I told them I knew about the emails, the calls, the rushed timeline. I knew about the bed reserved at Rosewood Care. And I knew this wasn't love. This was a strategy. Kayla said I was overreacting, that they were just scared for me. I told her I believed that, but I also believed she was scared of something else, that I wouldn't give them what they wanted. Then I thanked Rachel and Marie for coming. I told Kayla and Tom they could go now. They didn't argue. Tom stood first. Kayla hesitated, folder still on the table. She reached for it, but I placed my hand over hers. Not today. They left without another word. I closed the door behind them and didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just exhaled. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd kept something mine. Dignity, maybe. Or power, or peace. Whatever it was, I wasn't letting go again. The silence after the door closed felt heavier than their voices. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. No more smiling. No more pretending. Just me and the truth, sitting thick in the room. I walked to the table where the folder still sat and moved it aside. Not out of anger, just to clear space. Then I brought out my own documents, the ones Rachel helped prepare last week. I sat down and began sorting through them, page by page, marking where changes needed to be made. Their names came off first, No ceremony. No hesitation. I crossed them out the way I used to cross out expired grocery coupons. Then I wrote in Ethan's name, slow and clear, like I was planting something that needed to last. I added Rachel's recommendations, made the trust irrevocable, and set it up to be protected from challenges. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard either. It felt like brushing out a tangled knot that had been sitting too long, tugging at everything else. I thought about Kayla's voice, how steady it sounded when she talked about moving me out, and how Ethan's whisper had been the only honest sound in the whole house. When it was done, I tucked the documents into a new folder, one that wouldn't sit in a drawer this time. I'd deliver them myself tomorrow. I would watch every page get signed and notarized. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I loved my daughter once with the kind of love that overlooked too much. I gave her grace for years. I gave her chances. I stopped giving myself. But that door had finally closed. What came next would be mine to choose. And I chose Ethan, not because he asked for anything, but because he told the truth when no one else would. I chose peace. Not the quiet kind that keeps the peace at your own expense, but the kind that grows in the space left behind when you finally stop waiting to be treated better. That night, I slept with the new folder beside me. Not out of fear, but as a reminder. I was no longer waiting for someone else to protect what mattered. I had already done it myself. The next morning, I made pancakes just the way Ethan liked them. Crispy edges, soft center, blueberries in every bite. The smell filled the kitchen like it used to when Walter was still around. And for a moment, everything felt right. Ethan sat at the table in his hoodie, feet swinging, fork in hand. He smiled when he saw the plate, then looked down quickly like he wasn't sure if he deserved it. I poured syrup over both our stacks and sat across from him. I told him softly that everything was okay now. That's what he told me had helped more than he could ever know. He nodded without looking up and said he was scared. Scared they'd be mad at him for telling me. I reached across the table and held his hand. I told him he was brave, that sometimes doing the right thing feels scary, but it's still right. I promised him no one was going to hurt me, and he wasn't in trouble. He whispered that he didn't want me to go anywhere. I told him I wasn't going anywhere, and he couldn't find me. Then I asked if he'd like to spend a few days with me this summer. We could build something in the backyard, maybe even paint the shed green. His whole face lit up. He said green was his favorite color. I told him it had always been mine too. We ate the rest of our pancakes, with easy silence between us. No noise, no tension, just the kind of quiet that feels full instead of empty. I looked at him, and I knew then that everything I'd done was worth it. Not for the house, not for the money, but for this, for him, for love that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with trust. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that growing older doesn't mean you have to give up your voice. People might speak more slowly to you. They might assume you're tired or forgetful. But age doesn't take away wisdom, and it sure doesn't erase your right to protect what's yours. I used to think love meant giving without question. I still believe in love, but now I know it can't be blind. Family should mean trust, not silence. And just because someone shares your name doesn't mean they have your best interests in mind. The hardest thing wasn't standing up to them. It was accepted that I had to. But once I did, the fear left. What replaced it was peace. A quiet, knowing that I'd drawn the line where it needed to be. Not just for myself, but for the one person who never asked for anything except my time. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or controlled, I want you to hear this. You still get to choose. You still matter. And you are allowed to say no. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to stand your ground. I'd love to hear your story.